Welcome to Let's Talk with Hart Hagen, and today I'm joined by Scott Martin of River Heritage Conservancy. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thanks for having us on.
Glad to have you. So what you see on the screen here, River Heritage Conservancy is, well, Scott, tell us a little bit about what River Heritage Conservancy is. It's something across the river at in New Albany and Jeffersonville, right?
Yeah, we are a nonprofit park conservancy. We've been around for about 3 years now, and we were created by a group of leaders in the southern Indiana region who looked around and really started to tackle some of the big issues that are confronting the northern suburban communities and asked really a fundamental question, which is, what is the one thing we could do today that would shape our region's trajectory the best? And the solution or the project that they centered on was this creation of what we consider and what we hope will be an iconic public park that stands shoulder to shoulder with our region's other great parks, like Waterfront Park, the Parklands of Floyd's Fork, of course, the Olmsted System, Jefferson Memorial Forest. And we elected to do this as a nonprofit conservancy, which your listeners will be familiar with, is the same model that really is used a lot in our area, from Bernheim to the Parklands, as I mentioned, even Waterfront Parks, a little bit one, the Olmsted Parks Conservancy. So kind of this partnership model, and that's who we are.
Right, great. So tell us about the land area that you're looking at here on the screen.
Yeah, so this is the park plan that we will be unveiling later this month, or later in August, at the end of August. What you're looking at there is about 600 acres of what today are brownfields, landfills, post-industrial type land uses on the north side of the Ohio River. That's kind of remarkable to us because it's located with less than 1.5 miles from downtown Louisville. And when you put it into combination with the Falls of the Ohio complex, totals up over 1,500 acres of really wild lands right in the center of a top 50 U.S. metro area. And it's the type of land complex that a Denver or a Seattle or San Francisco would give their left leg to have. We have the opportunity rather quickly to deploy a pretty large piece of green infrastructure right into the core of our urban center. And that's what's driving our work right now.
Well, this must be like, how did you and the other organizers of this project, how did you decide that this is you could spend your time on so many different things. Why do you want to spend your time on this?
Well, it's a great question, and I think a lot of it in our community goes back to Frederick Law Olmsted. The story of what brought him to Louisville in the late 1800s was a group of business leaders. It wasn't government that brought him to town and provided him with the resources to sketch out on paper the Cherokee, the Shawnee, the Iroquois, the parkways that we know and love today. And I think it was that experience and the fact that we watched Louisville grow around those parks for 100 years that then inspired Waterfront Park, and then inspired the Parklands of Floyd's Fork to do it again. And I think our community, regardless of anyone's partisanship, appreciates these really big park moves. And one of the reasons is, we have a lot of challenges in the world today, a lot of them, and they're massive. Climate change is just really the starting point. And a lot of them feel like they're insurmountable, that you can't be the change. Well, the good thing about parks is you can build these things. And they can turn into public goods and ecological goods by making decisions. And I think that's what drew our group to it, is the tangible difference and the ability to see results on the ground.
So, Scott, one thing that I'm excited about, and I'm sure you're excited about too, is the fact that urban areas need to be relied on for wildlife habitat, for bees, butterflies, and birds, and even some of our mammals like foxes and rabbits and raccoons, and some of the predatory birds like hawks and owls. all of these can and should be part of our urban habitat. Is that part of our urban life? And you know, the farm is not, the rural areas are not wildlife habitat anymore. They could be, but they're not. And so is that partly what you had in mind, wildlife habitat? Is that partly what you have in mind with River Heritage Conservancy?
Yeah, it is. It drives our work. And I'll tell you, it philosophically drives it for a reason. When I go out and talk to folks about the environment, particularly high schoolers, I love talking to high school kids about it. I ask them, where do you go to study it? And invariably, they'll say, well, you got to go to the Rockies, or you have to go to Belize, Central America, or the Amazon. And nothing could be further from the truth. We have greater diversity of wildlife here in the Louisville metro area than there is in the entire state of Nevada. We have 180 bird species that have been accounted for in our project site by our biologists. You know, when we go from looking like Poland, like bad Poland, gray in February, to this lush green environment in May over 6 weeks, something like only 7% of the globe goes through that. So these are, we think it's a really special environment, and that's the highlight. Now the trick, and it is a trick, is how do you slow people down to appreciate it? How do you take them to those memories? And that's where great design is our leader, because one of the great fun discussions we had in the master plan, one of the designers is from San Diego, and sometimes it takes people from afar to say something we don't appreciate. And he said this to me, Scott, your show in this park will change 4 times a year. Each season you get a new park. In San Diego, we do not. And what that does to us is that elevates the ecology of the site as an attractor, but also something we build too. So that right now, if I took you out there, the ability to see a scarlet tanager is present. If we take you out, yeah, there was a bear spotted there earlier this week. Yeah, there's stuff going on around us that we think is the show, and we want to elevate that.
Well, you know, Scott, a lot of people have heard about climate change, and but very few people, relatively speaking, have heard about the sixth great extinction, the tremendous loss of biodiversity that's happening right in our midst right now. And in order for that to change, we have to create wildlife habitat where we live, work, and play. So it seems like River Heritage Conservancy is a wonderful opportunity to create that habitat in our midst. And since it is basically an urban area, then homeowners can take some of the observations that they see at River Heritage Conservancy, take it home, and create and extend the habitat that they saw.
Yeah, that's
so
precisely
how does that
right.
work? How does that work?
Yeah, great question. So, you know, we started from the premise of our region doesn't need another waterfront park part 2. I mean, that's where we start. The second point we started from heart is our site floods a lot, like massively, to a degree of which is shocking to me. The water will come up and down 30 to 50 feet at that lower pool each year. And about 70% of our site will go underwater about every 3 years now. Our park design is designed with climate change in mind. We did the projections on climate change. So we think it'll flood every year going forward. And so all of our plant selections, our landscape selections are based with that in mind. And then they are based with choices we made on ecological service. You know, a climax forest is wonderful. I feel at home in it. A lot of people use the term old growth forest, but I know what they really mean. They mean that place where you're standing underneath the trees that inspire you. And that's wonderful. It has this great place. What we have to do is acknowledge that's good, but that only serves one type of critter. We have to make the intentional interventions on our landscape to maintain and establish different habitat types to serve different critters. And people in their yards, we hope they will be encouraged when they see our landscape to do the same thing, because that scarlet tanager I mentioned earlier doesn't know when it's in the park or it's in your backyard, and it doesn't care.
Absolutely.
So that's the magic of getting it done.
So did you say that you have found like 180 species of birds observed?
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I'm a fan of Dr. Doug Tallamy, as you probably are, and he has convinced me that breeding birds are the gold standard. It's like if you plant the right plants and including the right trees, then you have enough caterpillars and enough insects, and then the insects feed like everything else. Insects serve a tremendous function of, an ecosystem is like a transfer of energy. So you've got energy coming from the sun, shines on the plants. If you have the right mix of plants, then you have a lot of native insects that can eat the native plants, and then they feed the birds. So do you have hopes that you can like attract more, provide habitat for an ever greater population of birds at River Heritage Conservancy?
Yeah, we do. And the way you accomplish that is Doug's work and then a maintenance of mid-successional, successional forests, meadow types, the edge stuff. It's all of the above. And we are a fan of Doug. One of the big lessons that I learned at the parklands, and your folks who've been out there may have noticed this, is in Beckley Creek Park, the northern park, when you walk along the Louisville Loop south of the Gein Center through the LA. We, there are those little tree structures out there. And if you're a sensitive person, even the slightest bit of sensitivity, you quickly realize that there's so many more birds moving back and forth, flitting back and forth across the trails there than you see in a typical park. And that's precisely because of what you just said. There were tree selections made that attract the bugs, that attract the birds. And with those little small interventions and the little selections you can make on, do I plant a persimmon or a redbud? Do I plant a sycamore or do I plant a silver maple? You can tune the forest and tune your park to serve a lot of different features. And that's the approach we'll be taking, because we do believe, and we're cheap, so I own it. The birds don't cost any, free entertainment. So let's let them be the stars. We have flying squirrels in our park.
Really?
And they're flying squirrels in Cherokee Park. The ability to build habitat where they can move between large forest blocks becomes very important. And these are the nuances in design that no one will see. The only people that will care are the dorks. But what they will see, Hart, is hopefully they see their first red-headed woodpecker. They see their first mink. And then suddenly your whole concept of what it means to live here in our community has changed. I don't live in a city. I live in nature. The decisions I make at home have downstream effects. We think that's how you change culture. And I don't think people in Boulder, Colorado, or Eugene are any smarter than us or any healthier. I don't think they're more ecologically minded. I just think they have a community that's been designed to present opportunities for awareness that we haven't always done.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we see here, everywhere, but we have lawn and we have lots of chemicals in the lawn, and we have lots of non-native trees and bushes and plants and non-native ornamentals. And people are just doing what the Joneses are doing. With River Heritage Conservancy, do you see an opportunity to educate people so that they can understand the connection between what they plant and the wildlife that you would like to cultivate habitat for?
Yeah, we would hope so. And we won't be first. I think the work of Olmsted Parks Conservancy at the top of Iroquois Park and Waterfront Botanic Gardens, there's so many folks in that space already. We're gonna glean them for every bit of information we can gain. The interesting thing when our park comes out, and I don't know if I'll hear it. I'm curious. This is my curiosity. This park's not going to look like a traditional park when this thing rolls out. There are going to be a lot of questions about where are the softball fields and the soccer fields, and they're not there. We have lawns. We pick them very carefully. There are only about 30 acres of lawn in the whole park. Can focus use and maintain it. And to your point and your question directly, we think that's max need for the humans to have a lawn space. We think there are other needs in the park that take preeminence. And so we make those choices through design. Now, we may be told we're all wrong. We may come out and I may hear you guys need more lawn space. But I think we have the balance. I like to think we have the balance right at this moment. And the result is it's going to be a park that looks a heck of a lot different than your traditional park.
Right. So Scott, one thing that interests me is water conservation. And, as climate change progresses, the rainfall is going to tend to be less frequent and then heavier downpours when it comes. And climate change promises to bring us more flooding. And you are designing this park so that it contemplates that and conserves the water and allows for people to patronize the park even when there's flooding. Am I on the right track with that?
No, you absolutely are. So, what funny story. So we began this planning work, probably about 2 Februarys ago. And if folks remember, that was one of our big floods. Remember the 3rd Street ramp was closed downtown, River Road was all closed. And so we went out to the Falls of the Ohio. I forget what I was doing. And I run into their park manager, and he's just mad. He's angry because his problem is he's trying to put up cones to close the parking lot because it's flooding, but he can't because there are too many visitors that are coming in to see the flood to let him close the park. And to us, that's when a light bulb went off. It's at that point, and I don't know why it just framed it beautifully, but it did. We realized that the flood is our story, and if you could be the park that during floods is actually when the park is at its peak. Those are its best days, because I don't care if you have an 8th grade education or PhD, everyone likes watching floods because we like watching houses wash downstream and cows float by. There's something about that everyone dials into. The other thing we really like about it is in this part of the world, we're not confronted with mountains like the Tetons, the Appalachians, nor do we have shorelines of majestic beaches. So what we have, because of geography, is a landscape that doesn't put man in relationship with his smallness very frequently. We don't have these moments where you are projected into something that is bigger and stronger and more massive than you. And we picked that up as something that our park could uniquely deliver, because the Ohio is a globally significant river. It is the Zambezi. It is that scale. We've dammed it, ditched it, plowed it, plugged it. We have manipulated it. For whatever reason, the section we're on, though, is one of the last wild sections. And when you feel the power of 400,000 cubic feet of water going by you every second, it's one of those moments where you feel small. And we think feeling small is important. We think feeling small in nature makes you a better person. It's a value proposition. And bringing people to that experience is something our landscape can do, and that we want it to deliver. Add to that climate change. There was a great study done by the Corps of Engineers in 2014. They had this thing called science they used to use to make decisions. It was really helpful. Maybe one day we'll go back to it.
Used to.
It looked at what climate change would do for water in the Ohio River Valley. This had never been looked at before. And it's a study that I think should be on every mayor's desk in the Ohio River, because what it says is what you picked up earlier. Big peaks, big valleys. But the end result is within about 50 years, and these are very conservative models. If we've learned anything, all of our models are too conservative. But that said, it's 30% more water in the Ohio here in Louisville on average in 50 years.
Really?
30% more water.
Wow.
It's massive.
So that water has to go somewhere. So does that water represent a higher average water level?
It does. It does. And the study was actually done by the barge industry and the Corps, because they immediately started thinking about, what about our locks? What about our levees? The infrastructure they've built? And the acknowledgement is they're not ready. And we just built a soccer stadium on the wet side of the levee, so I don't even know if we're paying attention sometimes either. But that being said, our park is all on the wet side of the levee. So the flooding we have today, which is big and severe, is going to be even more significant in the future. So our design, as much as we can, and I felt really cocky about this a few years ago. I'm not sure I feel cocky anymore. I was like, yeah, we designed to it. But it was designed to those models. So it can be more resilient in the face of flooding. We took all the Sandy lessons, the Katrina lessons on landscape, and brought them to this, one of the first climate change adapted parks ever designed in the Midwest and Upper South. So it'll be a laboratory for cities, we hope, to come and visit and learn from. I want to show them how soft solutions work better than walls. And we are, part of our park is about strategic retreat. And strategic retreat for people is okay because it provides more room for critters. So all of that balancing act has to talk on site.
Well, tell us a little bit about the history of the site, and then I want you to talk about I forget the name of the National Parks City Foundation. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Two great stories. So the history of the site, I will never work in my career on a richer site than this. The Falls of the Ohio has been inhabited for about 14,000 years. The folks at the Smithsonian tell us that the Falls Complex was the equivalent of New York City pre-1491. And this was the big learning for me, because I always thought of myself as kind of an amateur person who loved history. But I didn't appreciate the pre-Mississippian cultures. 1491, we're New York City. The next 50 years, 3 to 5 million people were unfortunately eviscerated due to disease, smallpox, everything that was introduced. So the story that you and I probably learned growing up of Kentucky being the dark and bloody ground when it was discovered by Daniel Boone or colonized by the European settlers who came over the Appalachians, the story we hear is that it was empty land and it was being battled by the Iroquois and the Shawnee. That's true. But the story we didn't learn, they were battling over lands that had just recently been empty. And our site was the New York City for those cultures, the pre-Mississippian cultures. So it is one of the richest sites. Now, unfortunately, the mound builders and all of their relics, the mounds, they're gone. So their stories have been eliminated from the landscape. So we have to figure out a way to bring those stories back. But it's not a Williamsburg, Jamestown sort of situation. You don't have buildings that you can restore. We have to do it through landscapes. The reason the Native Americans were there is so commonsensical to us. The Falls is where the great bison herds would have migrated. The eastern bison would have summered in Wisconsin and they wintered in Tennessee. And then they crossed the Ohio here in Cincinnati. So you would have had fish, if you can imagine, the sturgeon, the paddlefish, the drum that would have come up the Ohio for the Falls, the bison coming across with everything that goes with them, the elk, the mountain lions, the short-nosed bears. What you're talking about is essentially Kroger of pre-European settlement in one spot. And that occurred uniquely at our location. And the importance of telling those stories and restoring that, we think is really important. Particularly, again, back to your earlier question. Ask kids where to go study the environment. They're going to tell me the Colorado River or the Columbia. Biologists will tell you probably the most interesting place pre-settlement would have been the Ohio. You would have had every type of wildlife and megafauna you can imagine here. It would have been more than the Serengeti. And so restoring that connection to us is something our landscape wants to do. And how do you do that short of having bison roaming your park, which we are not going to do?
Why not?
Something you got to figure out. I know people are thinking it. And then you have the stories of the Underground Railroad that moved through the site. Lewis and Clark left from the site. The town of Clarksville, the state of Indiana's first land grants were on the site. So you get all these layered history stories that move across it, but they're all just stories, Hart. They're not buildings and structures. And so how do you thoughtfully convey the story that when you're in this park, you would have been standing on free land if you're an African American escaping bondage? You know, the weight of that landscape begins to sit home to you. Then you enter the current land use, which are landfills and junkyards that have manipulated the landscape. How do you manage that? So the complexity of getting it right without being too cute, you know, you don't want to be audacious enough to think you can get everyone's story right or do some sort of cultural appropriation that's insensitive or unthoughtful, but you still feel a need to tell it through design.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited about, you know, Orwell said, who controls how's it go? Who controls the present controls the past, and who controls the past controls the future. So these stories that come down to us, I mean, I used to be a flag-waving patriot. I still love my country, but I just sometimes hate what the government has done to it and what these stories, we get false and misleading stories about Native Americans. And I think one of I felt violated, well, violated is a strong word, but I recently read Mark Shepard's book, Restoration Agriculture, and just to hear him talk about the megafauna, I feel like, you know, you mentioned this being like the Serengeti and the mountain lions following the bisons, and the megafauna are like the bisons are like the smallest of the megafauna. You know, you had mammoths and things like that, and just there's so much to be told, and it's a story that if we tell it right, if we tell enough people, then it can start to change our you know, national narrative in a way that can make change for us. So that's me grandstanding, but I'm happy and excited that River Heritage Conservancy is an ideal place to tell those stories about the migrations and did you say the sturgeon coming up the stream, and it's the Kroger of, whoever wants to eat. If you're a person, you want to eat. If you're a mountain lion and you want to eat, that's where it's happening.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So it's a very interesting place in American history. That, like you said, the stories just haven't been told very well and very thoughtfully. So this is a chance to maybe do that.
And you're going to tell me about the Parks, National Park Cities Foundation. And
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I'm now serving a term as in the World Urban Parks Organization, and this is a cause we've taken up globally, and it kind of fits with, I know, what you're interested in as well. From Sydney to London to Vancouver to Louisville, I think we've all been frustrated by a distinction we make, that there's nature and then there's cities. Or, we have 1,000 things we're doing to work on sustainability or work on diversity in our cities, but it feels herky-jerky. And it never seems to coalesce. And what a group has done out of the Salzburg Institute and National Geographic, and I encourage your folks to check it out, is the mayor of London declared his city last July the first national park city. And what they essentially said is the whole city is a park. And whether the land is owned by a public agency or it's your yard, you're part of a park. And wildlife is part of this. You share the space, and you are wildlife. And outdoor recreation just isn't something we do in our parks. But what if we had climbing walls?
One.
So yeah, the mayor of London declared the whole city of London a national park. It's the first one on the globe. And the thought is that let's do something that unifies everyone. Widen the table for more decision makers to be a part of how power is distributed and how decisions are made about ecology and recreation. And acknowledge that wildlife and recreation don't just occur in parks. We're going to fail if we keep just thinking it can happen in these little boxes of green space. And so that's the move. And I think what's most powerful about it is it introduces a new vocabulary that feels comfortable, because the word park has such a powerful emotional connotation that it allows us to have discussions that words like sustainability, climate change, they're not as welcoming and warm. A park is a warm thing. And if your listeners want to learn more, I encourage them to Google up National Park City Foundation. They'll see the charter. There's a global charter now that's taken form. And now we're rolling it out globally. And we hopefully aim to have 25 cities across the world that are national park cities by 2025. Adelaide will be next up. Melbourne, Vancouver, and Glasgow, Scotland, are looking at it right now. And we're interested to see some American cities that are ready to step up and take the charge. And I like to believe Louisville could be one. Because of our wildlife diversity, our existing Olmsted system of parks, and quite frankly, the civil distress and concerns we're moving through now, to me, clarify that there's a call for increased equity in how we approach green space and how we approach what it means to live here. And so I would, it's a little bit of hometown cooking on my part, but I think we're searching for that vocabulary to allow us to take some of those jumps. And I really like what I'm seeing come out of London. London is 626 cities. London's not one city, it's 620.
Yeah.
So if they can do it and, deal with all those political things, I think we can do it here.
Well, what you're talking about reminds me, Doug Tallamy is just somebody I continue to refer to because he's taught me so much and continues to teach me a lot. But, one of my main points that I draw from him is that the parks, we have this illusion that says parks are we have these nature preserves. So nature is preserved in the parks, but the parks aren't enough space. They're maybe 5 or in some places 10 or 15% of the total land area. We know that if you shrink down the natural spaces, then that you correspondingly shrink down the number of species that can even survive there. And our parks are too few, too far between. There's too much distance in between them. Every energy, like every flying or traveling animal that, like bees, butterflies, and birds, they have an energy budget. They only have so much energy when it comes to going from one place to the next. So if wildlife, if bees, butterflies, and birds are to survive, it's going to be because we invite them to live where we live, work, and play. And it seems to me that the National Park Cities Foundation has that same vision, that where we live, work, and play is also a place for wildlife. Am I on the right track with that?
You're precisely on the right track. And we all acknowledge if we're just counting on parks to carry us through, it's not enough. It was never designed to be enough. We weren't thinking about it that way. So this is a vocabulary to allow us to move forward. And just to give you an idea what London's doing now, and it's worth a Twitter just to see what they're up to because it's very exciting. They've got 200 volunteers who are now National Park City Rangers, and they're trained to talk to people about what tree is over their sidewalk or where's the best place to go for a walk, and it doesn't have to be in a park. It's about activation of your space and awareness. They're working with their equivalent of Home Depot there to move out of invasive plants, to move into a collection of plant materials that's specific to the needs of their community. And these aren't big decisions by any stretch. They're actually pretty small decisions. But if you make a bunch of them together, imagine if at Lowe's you had wildflowers that weren't geraniums, that you could go and you could buy coneflowers and echinacea and your Rebecchias and all of our native grasses with the comfort that you do for lawns. Those drips add up ecologically. There's a concept in London now, one of their really tall new super towers, to do a 34-story climbing wall where folks will be able to go climbing, outdoor climbing on it, belay. I mean, this is just out of the box thinking. But suddenly, if you think when I leave my front yard, I'm still in a park, it gets, to me, it tugs my heartstrings. But I believe it's a vocabulary that everyone can rally to.
I couldn't agree more. Mark, I'm sorry, Scott, we could keep talking, but our time is about up. How can people get in touch with you at River Heritage Conservancy, and how can we help?
Yeah, so we do have a website, riverheritageconservancy.org. If you would go to that and just sign up to be on the normal email list or get on the social medias, the Facebook, Instagram, Twitters, we're on those. Just look up River Heritage Conservancy. And then at the end of this month, we will be introducing the full park plan and the park identity. And that will provide a great opportunity for folks to begin engaging with us, either as volunteers, donors, supporters. We'll start doing the tours of the site as soon as the pandemic relieves itself, and we can do that. And begin this charge up the hill.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Scott. I can't wait to hear and see more of River Heritage Conservancy as things move along.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity and, encourage everyone to do what they keep doing, which is get outside to save your sanity right now. We all need more vitamin D and more time outside now more than ever.
Absolutely. That's a great place to end. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.